Was King John a monster? Seriously, a guy who enjoyed torturing prisoners and systematically dismantling the English legal system? Did he truly believe he could get away with it all? And more importantly, could a bunch of disgruntled barons actually stop him? Let's rewind. 1215. England was simmering. Not with a pleasant autumnal warmth, but with the kind of heat that promises a violent storm. King John, a man whose nickname Lackland felt remarkably apt, was stuck in a sticky situation in France, battling for lands he'd never really earned. Back home, his barons were furious. They'd been squeezed dry with taxes, their rights trampled, and their privileges ignored. They weren't just complaining, they were plotting. And they had a charter, a dusty old document from Henry I, to prove it, a charter that suddenly looked a whole lot more relevant than it had before. It wasn't some polite request, mind you. This was a declaration of war, simmering beneath the surface of courtly manners. The barons, a tangled web of marriages, kinship, and shared grievances, saw John's reign as a betrayal of everything Plantagenet had stood for. They weren't just angry, they were convinced they were fighting for the very soul of England. And they had a man named Innocent III, the Pope, on their side, a surprisingly powerful ally in this medieval power struggle. Innocent, bless his papal heart, wasn't exactly thrilled with John's antics. He declared a hearing in Rome, a proper legal showdown, and predictably sided with the barons. It wasn't a nuanced judgment, a thoughtful compromise. It was a blunt, utterly decisive condemnation of John's behavior. The Pope essentially told John to shove it, demanding that the barons pay their taxes and stop demanding more rights, a message that landed like a brick through the stained glass windows of John's court. The air thickened with tension. Civil war wasn't just a possibility, it was a looming shadow, a dark certainty. Then, on May 5th, the unthinkable happened. A group of rebel barons led by the spectacularly named Eustace de Vesci and Robert Fitzwalter, who, let's be honest, had a title that screamed, "I'm important," formally renounced their allegiance to John. They declared him illegitimate, essentially saying, "We're not playing this game anymore." Fitzwalter, with his grandiose title of Marshal of the Army of God, was the ringleader, a man who clearly enjoyed the dramatic flair of a medieval rebel. These weren't just any barons, either. They were a carefully assembled team, a collection of powerful families with deep roots in England. There was William de Mowbray, a northern baron with a personal vendetta against John, Richard de Percy, a man known for his stubbornness and his refusal to back down, and Roger de Montbegin, a lord of Hornby in Lancashire, a place that probably smelled strongly of sheep and discontent. And then there were the Eastern barons, a different breed altogether. Richard de Clare, Earl of Hertford, was a force to be reckoned with, a flamboyant nobleman with a son, Gilbert, who was equally determined to challenge John's authority. Geoffrey de Mandeville, Earl of Essex and Gloucester, added another layer of power to the rebellion. Robert de Vere, Earl of Oxford, Henry de Bohun, Earl of Hereford, and William Marshall's son, William the Younger, completed the picture, a diverse group united by a single, burning desire to overthrow a king they despised. Some of these barons were motivated by pure self-interest, of course. They wanted land, wealth, and power. Fitzwalter, however, was a different story. He genuinely believed he was fighting for a righteous cause, a crusade against tyranny. He saw himself as a champion of the people, a defender of English liberties, a surprisingly common delusion amongst medieval rulers. The rebels weren't just a ragtag bunch of disgruntled nobles, they were a strategic force. They knew they needed a stronghold, a base of operations, and they found it in London. The city, a sprawling metropolis with towering stone walls and a bustling economy, was the linchpin of England. Controlling London meant controlling the flow of trade, the movement of troops, and most importantly, the hearts and minds of the people. The race to London was a desperate dash through the dark of night. Earl Salisbury, a veteran of the disastrous Battle of Bouvines, led the charge, followed by Fitzwalter and a contingent of rebel barons. They were a whirlwind of steel and determination, racing to seize the city before John could react. As they approached, London was a fortress, a testament to the vision of William the Conqueror. The city walls, thick and imposing, were protected by a labyrinth of gates guarded by loyal soldiers. Inside, scribes were frantically copying documents, preparing to send decrees to all the loyal earls, barons, and knights, a clear message: abandon John or face the consequences. The rebels arrived on May 17th, a quiet Sunday morning, to a city already bracing for war. The bells of the churches chimed, a mournful soundtrack to the impending conflict. The gates were flung open, welcoming the rebel forces into the heart of England. The rich citizens were favorable to the barons, a chronicler wrote, and the poor ones were afraid to murmur against them. London, it seemed, was ready to throw in its lot with the rebels. John, meanwhile, was scrambling to contain the crisis. He attempted to negotiate, offering arbitration by the Pope himself, a move that only served to highlight his isolation. He even tried to appease those he'd treated particularly harshly during his campaign in Poitou, offering personal apologies and promises of reconciliation, but it was too late. The barons had already declared their independence, and John's authority was crumbling. The situation was a tangled mess of legal arguments, political maneuvering, and outright warfare. The barons weren't simply demanding a change in government, they were challenging the very foundations of kingship. They wanted to limit the power of the crown to ensure that the king ruled according to the law, not according to his whims, but they were also fighting a losing battle. John was still the legally recognized king, backed by the power of the papacy. He could still dispossess his enemies, outlaw them, and wage war against them. The rebels were essentially fighting a guerrilla war, a desperate attempt to undermine John's authority from within. Then, a glimmer of hope. Innocent III, the Pope, stepped in to mediate, appointing Archbishop Langton as a neutral arbitrator. Legal hearings were held in Rome, and predictably, the Pope sided with the barons, a decision that infuriated John and further alienated him from his supporters. Innocent's judgment was a blunt, uncompromising condemnation of John's actions. He demanded that the barons pay their taxes and cease making demands of the king, a message that was delivered with the force of a papal decree. It wasn't a solution, of course, but it was a signal that the Pope was on the barons' side. The road to war was paved with broken promises and failed negotiations. John offered to submit to arbitration, but the barons rejected his terms. They demanded a council of 8 barons, chaired by the Pope, to oversee the negotiations, a demand that was simply too much for John to accept. On May 12th, John took a drastic step. He ordered the confiscation of rebel lands. There was no turning back now. England was plunged into civil war, a brutal conflict that would test the limits of loyalty and resolve. The rebels, led by Fitzwalter and Salisbury, pressed their advantage, racing towards London. The city was their key, their strategic prize, and they were determined to seize it at all costs. As the rebels approached, John retreated to Windsor Castle, gathering his forces and preparing for a final stand. The roads and waterways between Windsor and London were filled with messengers, desperately seeking a way to broker a peace. But the chasm between the king and the barons was too wide to bridge. Finally, after a month of grueling negotiations, a compromise was reached. The barons agreed to draft a document known as the Articles of the Barons, a list of 49 points that outlined their demands. These included provisions for justice, feudal precedent, and the limits of royal power. The negotiations continued for several more days, culminating in the signing of the Magna Carta at Runnymede on June 18th. The document, a masterpiece of legal maneuvering, was a testament to the power of compromise, a fragile agreement that satisfied neither side entirely. The Magna Carta granted sweeping rights to the English Church, affirmed the liberties of London, and limited the power of the Crown. It established procedures for levying taxes, ensuring that the king could not impose new taxes without the consent of the barons. It protected the rights of widows and heirs, and guaranteed that no free man would be imprisoned or punished without a fair trial. But the Magna Carta was also full of highly specific clauses, detailing the exact conditions under which certain rights could be exercised. It laid out the rules for wardships, inheritances, and scutage payments, a complex web of legal obligations that would be debated and interpreted for centuries to come. Clause 39, perhaps the most famous clause in the entire document, declared that no free man shall be taken or imprisoned or decised or outlawed or exiled or in any way ruined, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. It was a bold statement of individual rights, a challenge to the arbitrary power of the king. The Magna Carta was intended to be a safeguard against tyranny, a way to ensure that the king ruled within the bounds of the law. But it was also a dangerous document, a challenge to the very concept of kingship. Despite its significance, the Magna Carta was immediately rejected by King John. He secured an annulment from Innocent III, who declared the charter null and void of all validity forever. The war resumed, and this time it escalated dramatically. Before the end of the year, Philip II of France, emboldened by the Barons' Rebellion, declared John's crown forfeit. Prince Louis, the heir to the French throne, invaded England, supported by the barons who sought to depose the tyrant king. John's reign came to a tragic end in October 1216, as he succumbed to dysentery during a desperate attempt to evade his enemies. He died a broken man, his kingdom in chaos, his authority shattered. The Magna Carta, initially a failed peace treaty, gradually evolved into a symbol of English liberty. It was reissued several times in the years following John's death, each time reaffirming its commitment to the rule of law, but the story doesn't end there. The Magna Carta sparked a long and bitter debate about the limits of royal power. It became the foundation for a series of legal and political struggles that would shape the course of English history. As Henry III ascended the throne, he faced the daunting task of restoring the monarchy and upholding the principles of the Magna Carta. The charter became a constant point of contention between the king and his barons, a reminder that the balance of power was always precarious. The Magna Carta's legacy is complex and enduring. It is a document of compromise, of conflict, and ultimately of hope. It represents a turning point in English history, a moment when the power of the king was checked and the rights of the people were acknowledged. But was it truly a victory for liberty, or simply a tactical maneuver by ambitious barons? Was John a monster, or simply a king struggling to maintain his grip on power in a turbulent era? The answers, like the Magna Carta itself, are open to interpretation. And so, as we stand here today, centuries after the events at Runnymede, we are left with a profound question. What does the Magna Carta mean to us now? Is it a relic of the past, a reminder of a bygone era? Or does it still hold relevance for the challenges we face today? Perhaps the most enduring question of all is this: can a document drafted in the heat of a medieval civil war truly capture the essence of freedom and justice? And can we, as citizens of the 21st century, truly live up to the ideals enshrined in those ancient words?